Welcome to Toffs&Toolers, Criminal Victorian Adventure, your weekly podcast delving into the cruel, the unusual, the mad, the sad, and the fads of Victorian England. So, how dost do my buff? Us bang-up rum dukes will today act as parson to peddler's French.
What did he say?
I think he was trying to buy a drink from a vicar.
Can't you Voker Romany?
I think he's lost it.
No, definitely. He wants to buy a drink. It's Voker Romany. It's gin, muddled with gin.
Okay, does nobody read the show notes? Voker Romany, it means speak cant.
Can't, but I definitely can speak.
Jesus. Can't, not can't, as in Thieves Cant.
Oh, you really should be a little clearer. I can't understand what you're saying.
That's the whole point, you barmy jackanate.
What did you call me? I mean, what did you call me? There's no need to use that sort of language, but let's introduce ourselves.
Okay, I'm Alex Hudson, your little urchin boy done good, here to guide you and this collection of barely sentient apes through the underworld of Victorian England. At my side, we have Mr. Hugh, who, despite all appearances, is actually quite well read. Say hello, Mr. Hugh.
Hello, Mr. Hugh. Voker Romany's all round.
No, it's not. That's not it. Alex Sweetman, who was transported here from Victorian England, but is sadly of the class Voker Romany is designed to evade, rather than a fluent speaker like myself.
Hello, everyone.
And Sean Gibson, a vagrant from the distant colony of Newcastle.
Hello.
And behind the scenes, we have our wonderful producers, Bella and Rob, and the extremely handsome Duncan writing the scripts. I think he actually wrote that bit himself. This week, as those of you sharper than my acquaintances will have surmised, we are discussing Thieves Cant, which is known by various names. Anglo-Polari, Peddler's French, Romany, etc., all of which I'm sure we'll get into later. Thieves' Cant is that language the criminal underworld used to hide their intentions when speaking in front of outsiders about their craft. Many of the words used were stolen from Romany. Some have become common as they have morphed into vaguely familiar terms like mug, which means face, or rat, which means
Snitch.
yes, while some have fallen out of use completely, like cull, which is a victim, and budge, which is a housebreaker. We'll get into some of the history, what we know about it, and perhaps mention Dickens, and perhaps even swear at each other in ways that your favourite podcast provider won't pick up and censor. So, without any grumbling of the gizzard or bear garden jaw, let's get into the gammon and patter of it and into this rigmarole.
I do think he's lost it.
No. The Cully Stan flashes Romley.
Quite, on with the show. Okay, welcome to the show. Let's start. Oh, do I actually need to explain Voker Romany?
I think just in case there are some people who don't entirely get what it is.
For the listeners.
For the listeners, yes, for the listeners.
I have
All
a
right.
question first. Are we allowed to Van Dyke on this
No,
episode?
okay, stop right there. That is not... All right, the three rules still apply. All right, the first one is no Van Dyking, and it's not...
Gord blimey, governor.
Gord blimey. We're talking about genuine slang here. So the back slang, the cant, Thieves' Cant, and Romany itself, Romany and Polari, as they were known. What Dick did was slightly different. He was a bit sort of like, yay, God bless you, Mary Poppins. Who'd have thought it, eh?
Stop it.
Yeah, exactly. So, we are not doing that. We're still not talking about Jack the Ripper.
Who?
He's out. Yeah, exactly. And Dickens gets everywhere,
Of
as you know.
course.
And he's going to be a big part of this because he's actually responsible for
It's all
popularising.
Dickens' fault.
It is Dickens' fault. He's basically, and we will later, do what
We will
Dickens.
hear what the Dickens.
Yeah, exactly. So, and whatever tenuous connection he has with whoever you're talking about today. So, Romany forms a big part of this. So, Romany, if you don't know, it's a community of travellers who settled primarily, well, in England, they settled in Norfolk. They were known for sort of settling in Norfolk, but their language, as a language of the traveller community, is something that seeped through into the criminal underworld as well. And it was a fantastic way of hiding what you're actually talking about. We still use those words. We still hear them in popular culture now. So you got kushti. Kushti is a good one, which means something that's proper and right. Chav, Chav culture was a thing here, but do you know what chav actually means?
Well, it's a derogatory term.
it is.
They
It
had
isn't.
shell suits in the Victorian.
Council housed
no,
environment.
no. Chav just means lad. It just means a boy.
I mean, it does describe most of them.
Yeah, all right. Okay. So if you're not from England of a certain age, chav became a code word in the, what was it, 90s, early 2000s?
I'd say, yeah, early 90s, 2000s.
Yeah, for a certain kind of young person.
They're
And-
particularly fond of Burberry.
Yeah. But chav itself as a name, as a word, just meant young lad. So you got kushti. Kosher is another one as well. Kosher meaning proper and correct as well.
Much like Kushti.
Yeah, very similar in those kinds of terms. So you had those kinds of words drifting through into sort of criminal. And then you had like the Victorian slang itself, the criminal slang. So you had words which are transposed from, I think it's from Jewish as well, Jewish or Romany, gone off, which meant thief. But then you had the specific terms like Tula. So a Tula was a type of pickpocket, a skilled pickpocket who would have used tools. Fine wirer was another one. Flimp was another term for pickpocket, or
I
a
like that
skilled
one.
pickpocket. Flimp, yeah, it's a good
It's a
one.
fun word, isn't it?
No idea where that came from, but it was another word. So you have all those particular words, and they would have been used in certain settings, especially marketplaces, to indicate the mark. So you'd have your group of pickpockets all shouting at each other in specific code phrases, say, we're going to go for this gentleman, he's got a fine handkerchief or whatever. And they could use those specific words to indicate, who they were going after, to grab what they needed.
So rather than like obvious substitutions like 2 pineapples a pair,
Yeah,
kind
what,
of thing.
pineapple. What markets are you going to in Victorian
well,
England?
someone said I should buy a pineapple.
Well, yeah, okay, we did have advertising related to pineapples, but they were very much a status symbol and not really a market. I mean, you'd be stealing the pineapple in Victorian times, not
Fair enough.
not a pocket watch.
You'd have trouble shifting a pineapple, though, as your average
Depends where you
Victorian
hide it, I
urchin.
guess. Yeah, yeah. I mean, they could be cunning, those urchins, But this is what Dickens was picking up on as part of Oliver Twist, and this was a book that was regarded. Critics at the time said it was too graphic. It was like talking about criminal activities, low morals, and all the rest of it. And a lot of his critics absolutely hated it. But it was precisely about these gangs of pickpockets in criminal times and the transfer of orphans into criminal environments. And they're not born into, but traveled through from being isolated in society and then being drafted into a life of crime.
Were they objecting more to the fact that it was like shining a spotlight on it, or the fact that it was happening?
Yeah, it was probably that as well. I mean, Dickens was always criticised for bringing to light these things which the Victorians would rather not talk about, and sort of gangs of young people sort of roving around London, basically unguarded, was not really the image that they wanted to present to the world. So, but Dickens wrote Oliver Twist on the basis of that, and of course, it's got the fluffy bits. Oliver eventually gets adopted. Oh, sorry, spoiler alerts. It works out.
Just
it works
in
out
case
okay
you haven't
for,
read it.
Yeah, it works out okay for Oliver in the end. He gets very nicely looked after. Thank you so much.
But I think they were right. I mean, they didn't want to shine a light on it, but it is now such an iconic image of London in those times.
But yeah, and you do get the sort of the other things, Oliver, and you've got a pick a pocket or two kind of thing going on. That it kind of overtakes. This was quite a serious social message at the time, and was regarded as pretty outrageous to actually point a light at it or point a finger at what was actually going on. And these were based on real things. Dickens didn't just pull this out of his hat. These were things that he observed happening in London, transposed to the page. So Artful Dodger was probably a mixture of different characters that he'd encountered. But there was a chance that Fagin was actually based on a real individual, which we'll talk about later. He got into trouble over that as well, because he kept calling Fagin the Jew. And
I can see how that could be problematic.
yeah. So this is part of the reason why he later wrote Our Mutual Friend. So that
As
he
an
could,
apology.
as an apology to the Jewish community, But let's just say that Fagin was very stereotyped, anti-Semitic representation of a Jewish character. It was still based on a real individual, potentially, and these people, the fencers that worked, to receive stolen goods, sell them on, and all the rest of it, existed. So it was real in that sense. But the portrayal specifically of Fagin as a Jewish character and the way that he talked about it was, slightly problematic. So he was being a bit of a Dickens, as we know, in that regard.
Thieves Cant, obviously a way for the criminal underworld to talk about things that they don't want other people listening into. There's a direct parallel there with Cockney rhyming slang.
Yeah, well, rhyming slang, back slang, and all the sort of various regional variations, all part of it. And that's where you get your apples and pears from.
Of course.
So hopefully by everybody listening, apples, thank you. Yeah. Trouble and strife, wife. So Cockney rhyming slang, if you don't know, I'd be very surprised if you don't know and you're listening to this show. But the idea was you have a couplet, 2 words. The last word always rhymes with the word it's actually meant to mean. Then you drop that last word. So instead of saying apples and pears, stairs, you say apples, got up the apples, because the trouble is up there. And she just called me up the apples. So that's how that particular works. Unless you're actually from that community at the time, no internet, no real way of communicating, you wouldn't have known it. So you hear somebody talking in this bizarre sort of strange language. They're all English words, but it doesn't make any sense to you.
Speaking of no internet, one of the big things that would have been difficult for them at the time, the local Thieves Cant would have to be different from, let's say, London to Edinburgh. It would be different words. You might be able to pick them up in context, but the way of talking would have to be quite varied.
Yeah, I think there is some evidence for like regional variations, especially with things like backslang. So backslang was a slight variation on things like rhyming slang. So penny was yenip, and police was esclop.
That's just backwards.
Yeah, I know. They went.
Oh, that's why it's called
You've
backslang.
cracked it.
Cracked the code already. Genius. And esclop was police, but that got shortened to slop. So that's where we get our word slop, apparently. So esclop, slop. That was police. What's the other one?
Is that also where you get the pigs because they eat the slop?
Yeah, maybe. But things like the one I can't figure out is like I think it's a shilling, which was a gennet, and I can't figure out what that's backslang from. How they got to gennet from.
Could it be monetarily? Like a shilling's not much, a guinea is a lot.
Oh, it could be something like that. Yeah, I guess. But there's obviously unless you actually know the specific backslang, you're not really going to unless you got yenip because it's easy enough. But a lot of these words, you'd have to sort of know them to actually sort of figure them out.
And if you're in a marketplace and people are shouting stuff all around you, you'd need to be listening to a specific conversation to think, hang on, they're saying gibberish.
Yeah. And of course, market traders had their own language. They were shouting to each other, talking about whatever they needed to trade. So you had all these people sort of milling around. So you wouldn't notice it. I mean, if you go through a marketplace or a crowded area like a train station, how often do you honestly think whether or not you're going to get pickpockets? They're still there. It still happens. You get those warning signs everywhere. So somebody sort of shouting something randomly, you're not really tuned into it, but you don't actually realise that you're the one actually being marked.
I suppose modern parlance is probably all more done through secret communication, mobile phones and stuff, but it wouldn't be that difficult to shout it out in public as long as you're using something people don't understand.
No, and it extended the signs as well. So travellers, especially itinerant travellers, had their own code. And they used to put signs on as they were travelling around the country to indicate whether or not this neighbour, this person was like welcoming or not. So if you're actually going by, you actually wander in. And they used to call them gypsy marks. But it could be any part of any sort of travelling community which actually leave them on like doorposts and things like that. They used to come out and find, chalk marks, these strange signs.
For those that come after.
Yeah. And there's like this whole sort of hidden language, like dotted around the countryside. Dickens was obviously concerned with what happened in London. So you got that kind of thing. And that's how it sort of spilled over into our modern understanding and why we get, Van Dyking going on. Because what was true then became a kind of joke or a stereotype over time, but it had a real function.
So how would Dickens have learned this language if it was a secret dialect?
Oh, apparently he took to wandering around London.
He was more of a journalist, wasn't he?
Yeah, he started his days as a journalist. So he spent a lot of time wandering the streets of London at night, really talking to people. There's probably a lot of stories in that, but taken at face value. He was really interested in these communities that most other people of his station in life weren't talking to.
Yeah, and I know there were dictionaries at the time. So there was a number of dictionaries. There was one from late 18th century, Francis Goss's dictionary, I think, of vulgar words. And that was updated in the early 19th century by the Whip Club. I don't know any more about that, but it might be worth looking into. About 1811. And there was a number of other dictionaries that he could have used from. And yeah, he would have gone to magistrates' courts, I'm guessing, and sort of hung out with police because that's where it came through. And he changed words as well. So he couldn't say the D word, damned. So he switched it out for jiggered. So I'll be jiggered. And that's where you get those kind of weird Victorian phrases, which didn't actually have any resemblance to real swear words or slang words, but kind of became standard because Dickens wrote them.
It is one of the joys of the English language, though, because we can use words at any position in a sentence. As long as contextually it makes sense, our brains will just make it work.
Yeah, so everybody knows I'll be jiggered is kind of like meant to be a sort of swear word, but he couldn't use the swear word in his text.
You can even just like make something up like I was hammered as a window. Doesn't make any sense, but everyone knows it means you were drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to use that now. Hammered as a window. So we'll talk about the possible source. It's a bit questionable. We'll talk about the possible source of Dickens' inspiration for Fagin. He was a character in himself. We do want to talk about what the Dickens.
We will.
What surprises do you have in store for us? Do we get any clues?
Well, I think we'll move on from authors this week. Try something a little different.
Okay. And okay, there's
Yes.
going to be no clues. Right, fine. Okay, I'm just going to have to.
Not literally.
I'm just going to have to be patient, I suppose. Sean, are you still collecting leeches, rat catching?
It's not leeches anymore.
Okay.
It's even worse if you can believe it.
Oh dear.
It's mudlarking.
Okay. I don't know what that is, but I
We'll
guess
find
we'll
out.
find out very shortly. All right. When we come back, we are going to find out what the Dickens. We're going to find out more about mudlarking. We'll see you in a moment.
Does your toothpaste make eating a shame? Are your chompers all rotten with pain? Do you wish that your cocoa and coffee and tea could once again be all lovely and pain-free? Frasers will whip 'em out quick and fuss-free. Come to Fraser's Barbers tonight. Your mouth may be rotten and brown. At Fraser's we won't let you down. A shot and a tug and a little blood flows. The doctors and quacks, well, you should never go.
Find us at 47A Whitechapel Road. Come to Fraser's Barbers tonight. And welcome back to the show. Our usual interlude. What the Dickens and whatever job you have this week, Sean. But we're going to start with what the Dickens. So who do you have for us this week, Mr. Hugh?
Well, our Dickens of the week, I thought I'd take a break from authors. Florence Nightingale.
Ah, the nurse.
Yes, perhaps more a poignant story than one of Dickensery.
Oh,
But while she was starting her career as a nurse, Dickens's Mrs. Gamp was perhaps the prototypical understanding of what a nurse was in the era. She was a main character in Martin Chuzzlewit, a gin-swilling, neglectful nurse who'd rifle through the pockets of her charges to fund her habit. So the image of nursing was in dire need of some reform. And that's what Nightingale went on to do. Her connection with Dickens also is in the real world. While she was out in the Crimea, a philanthropic friend, Angela Burdett-Coutts, worked with Dickens to send out an enormous drying machine to her Crimean hospital. This would launder all of the fabric for the hospital, the sheets and so forth. And in true Victorian fashion, it was an enormous brass device, steam-powered. How Dickens knew about this sort of cutting-edge engineering project, I do not know. In any case, our story of the Dickensery of Nightingale goes back a little further. When she was a youth, she travelled in Athens, visited the Parthenon, and adopted a delightful pet owl, a little owl, smallest of all the owls perhaps. And this became her pet. She saved it from some local boys who were tormenting it, and the owl idolised her. It would live in her pocket and pop out And being from Athens, she called the owl Athena. She would do her rounds on the hospital wards, particularly with children. The owl would pop out from her pocket and it would bow for Florence, bow to the little children, and everyone was charmed. However, the next step of her career, in 1854, Florence was getting ready to go to Crimea, where she made her name as a nurse, and the owl was forgotten, left in the attic with no food, no water, and by the time Florence was ready to depart, the owl had sadly died. And this was utterly destroying for her. She spent 2 days grieving the poor little beastie and preserved it in true Victorian fashion as a taxidermy owl. And stuffed Athena can still be visited in the Florence Nightingale Museum to this day.
No.
Yes.
Well, that sounds like my next trip out in London. Fantastic. Oh, that's quite charming, actually. It isn't very
Yes.
Dickens. She spent a lot of time in bed, though, didn't she, Florence?
Well, in her later years, yes. On return from the Crimea, she was a famous person and had ideas about how nursing should be reorganised, ideas that were very important, very transformational, and which a lot of people were relatively unprepared to listen to.
Yeah, I can't imagine that anybody wanted to listen
Yeah.
to a woman with ideas at that particular time, especially during the 1850s.
And a curious manoeuvre she pulled was essentially staying at home, often in bed, which kind of forced people to come and visit her.
Of course. That
So
makes sense.
The great movers and the shakers of the day would almost have to come and pay court to her to take
Once
on
you're
her
famous
ideas.
enough, people will come
Exactly.
to you.
I wish there were more owls later in her life, though.
Mm.
Maybe around her bed or something.
Maybe the same owl, just not dead.
Okay,
Oh.
thanks. Thanks. All right. So, not so much about owls as such. I assume are we moving away from animals and animal cares for your job of the week?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So no owls, no leeches, no rats.
Maybe a few animal bones
Okay.
involved, but
So
mostly not.
what is the job of the week?
So, calling it a job is very generous.
Okay.
I couldn't really find too much in the way of paying labour this week. So I decided to give mudlarking a go. If you don't know what mudlarking is, all those barges you see coming down the Thames full of coal and other things, well, sometimes some of that stock falls off, you see. And when the tide comes out, you can find that stock in the mud, in the silt.
Oh, so it's still quite like the moist swamp.
Fewer leeches?
Less so up to your waist, but a lot more human filth,
Oh.
unfortunately. It's not the cleanest of rivers, the old Thames. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, your bread and butter there. Ugh.
No.
Your bread and butter would be coal, for example. There's a lot of coal barges where some coal falls off and some coal falls off, if you know what I mean. I would never do
Nudge,
something
nudge,
so
wink, wink.
unscrupulous, but I know some of my so-called colleagues would occasionally sneak onto the barges and push a sack off to collect later.
Rock the boat, so to speak.
Indeed.
Mm.
So yes, coal's your bread and butter. You get a little bit of coin from it. Any old iron, so rusted screws, some hinges, anything that can be maybe melted down and reforged. The real prizes is your brass, and copper. So copper nails or the bits that line the ships, making them look a bit nice. They might knock off on the side of the dock. You can sometimes find that. You would think that's a bit of a jackpot. And with the animal motif, sometimes some old bones that can be ground down into fertilizer and
Fabulous.
such.
Okay. But not to labour the point, but
Hmm.
barges carry a lot of coal.
Yes.
If you're just picking up a few lumps of coal, that kind of implies you're not making a huge amount of money out of
Yes.
this.
I did manage to make enough for my room on a night, and that's about it, unfortunately. And some people that I saw there, they even lost their lives. You make so little money, and you can get stuck in that silt. And if you get stuck, you can't get your foot out, and the tide comes back in.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, you can drown very easily. I won't be keeping up with that.
Well,
not-
it
not
sounds
worth
like a
the pittance of money
legitimate
that you-
job, though. So,
It's a bit frowned upon.
right, okay. So, I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark to say that you may not be pursuing this as a future career.
Unlikely.
Okay, all right.
Hopefully, I'll find something a bit more appropriate for next week.
And hopefully one with fewer exposure to diseases.
Indeed.
Again.
Indeed, yes.
All
Pays
right.
a little better.
Yeah, we definitely want that for you. Fewer diseases, better pay.
Well, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for What the Dickens, and obviously for Job of the Week. Good luck in your next week's job hunting. After the break, we'll get back to the business at hand, and we'll return to discussing Voker Romany and the mysterious figure that may have been behind Fagin.
I say, fellow, which way to the railway station?
Oh, you're a bricky giggle mug all afternoonified, no mistake. No lollygagging, no nanty-narking, I'll wager. I'll get you there, no mafficking or even evening wheezes.
I beg your pardon?
What?
You there? Are you confounded like this chap when conversing with commoners? Are you confused with their litany of lexicographical mutterings? You need Nikolai Gogol's miraculous utterance urchin who will translate nonsense into the sensible.
Thank goodness. Here's Nikolai Gogol's utterance urchin. Here's a penny, child. What did this vagabond say?
He said, "You're a well-dressed and personable individual. Someone not interested in wasting time or messing around. He offered to get you to the station without interruption or distractions from fake news."
Top hole. You're no Glocky for certain. Now I'll not miss my Chuggaboo, who is the jammiest bit of jam there is.
What?
Yes, Nikolai Gogol's utterance urchin for all your translation needs. Remember, if it strains your wit, Gogol it. Right, and welcome back to the show. And we really do wish you well, Sean. I mean, I hope you can actually get some sort of job which doesn't involve you exposed to awful diseases.
Me
Or-
too. Me
And that
too.
you can do, and
That's
make a
stretching
living
things
at.
a little bit, but let's hope.
Right. We are going to talk about more about Dickens. Another fascinating connection in your last What the
Tell
Dickens.
us.
But I do want to sort of mention the use of Polari specifically and how it's lasted through the ages. I think it's worth just sort of tagging on before we talk about the origins of Fagin. Polari was used over decades, even after the Victorian era. It shows how useful this kind of language is. I mean, we can talk about kids and how they use their language now, skibbity, whatever, and
Merging of cultures,
Yeah,
patois,
exactly.
and
but Polari was specifically used during the 50s and 60s during the gay community. Now, homosexuality was still outlawed in the UK over that particular period. So members of the community adopted Polari, this Victorian mishmash of Romany language, as a signal between themselves so they could actually identify each other. So much so, it was included in a comedy show. One of the players was Kenneth Williams. Kenneth Williams was star of stage and screen, Carry On films, if you know those. But in his own time, in his own right, he was an amazing comedian up until his passing a few years ago. But they actually used Polari on the show. So you had the BBC broadcasting a language then exclusively used by the gay community to signal that they were gay, and they could actually sort of talk to each other around that. So it's kind of fascinating how the language was used all the way through this whole period, and must have been used in London well into the 50s and 60s still. And of course, you still get Cockney rhyming slang and so forth as part of that, although it's slowly dying out, I think. We're starting to see that sort of fade. But that kind of slang, that criminal language, has always existed in London from Victorian ages through to the middle of last century, which I find absolutely incredible.
was it used to say specific things, or was it more just like a flag indicator? Hey, there
You
are
could have
other
whole
people here.
conversations in Polari if you wanted.
Wow.
How bonnet a bardy of dolly old eek.
Sorry, what?
Yes. So that means how nice it is to see your face.
Thank you.
That's quite all right.
Must have
I
been a
don't know
lie.
how to reply.
No, that's quite all right too. But you got those kinds of phrases thrown in with that, and of course, as soon as somebody speaks to you that way, you know that they are part of that community, and that's a positive indication because you'd have to know all the sort of signs and symbols associated with that. So it creates a safe space.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it was the criminal classes using it during the 19th century to talk amongst themselves, to identify each other, or whether it was later with the gay community trying to create a safe space for themselves by identifying other gay men who might, so that they wouldn't actually get arrested. So that kind of language has multiple different uses amongst different kinds of communities over, well over 100 years. Thieves' Cant goes back to the 16th century, so in England. So it's been very well documented. So I just find that kind of thing fascinating. It's such a rich part, and it doesn't get talked about much, but Dickens did. And Dickens was the first person to actually sort of talk about fine wirers and flimps and all these other incredible words.
Bring it into the limelight.
Yeah. But he got that from real people. And one of the potential, so he denied it until his dying breath, but there was a fence called Ike Solomon, who himself, his father, Henry, was also a fence. So he, as a child, he was brought into this kind of life. And he basically had this criminal career of selling stolen goods. Fagin, basically. So a figure within the Jewish community who was selling stolen goods and had a sort of rather checkered past, let's say. He was transported in 1810 for theft and various other criminal activities. He found his way back to London in 1818. He made a very successful and high-profile escape from Newgate Prison. Got to America. A relative of his was transported out to Van Diemen's Island in Australia. He ended up getting caught again and then transported out to Australia and ended most of the end of his life out in Australia. So this is a guy who had quite an incredible life. But
Considering the journey times were pretty long as well.
Yeah.
Getting transported out and making it back within 8 years.
It seems pretty good.
It's incredible.
And then going to America and then having to come back and then getting transported to Australia again and then basically having to live out the rest of your days there. I think, Ike Solomon is quite an interesting character, but he always ended up sort of like fudging it or denying whether or not he was Fagin, basically.
It
The
does
real
sound like
wing it kind of guy.
Yeah.
he sounds like the kind of guy who would actually have a successful life in Australia as well.
Yeah. Yeah. He did quite well out there, I think. I have to look a bit more into his life, but he was quite an interesting character in his own right. And he had this fascinating life, and this big episode where he escaped from Newgate Prison was in 1827, was where he sort of became really famous at that particular time. But you could see the parallels, what you were saying earlier about Dickens roaming around looking for inspiration from the various gin palaces. All right, love, I'm just off down gin palaces. I'm looking for inspiration for my book. Yeah, of course you are, Charles. Yeah, okay. And yeah, there must have been characters like Ike Solomon that you ran into and talked to and said, "Oh, this is going to write itself."
If you're that much of a character as well, you're going to draw the attention, even accidentally. And Dickens got everywhere.
Yes, he did. As we know, because he was a Dickens. He was a bit of a Dickens. We can't talk about that part of history without Charles sticking his head up and getting himself involved. But what I quite like is that this dotted line you can draw between what we're talking about, the criminals, the things that actually happen, the Thieves' Cant, and all of that kind of stuff, and the real world characters that you must have drawn upon. And starting to introduce the language as well to people as well, to a huge audience. And that's why we got this, even the vowel switching, the V's and W's dropping H's, Gall Blimey Governor kind of thing. That all came from Dickens because he wrote that way. He wrote how he heard people speak at the time.
I wonder how much he ended up influencing the actual Thieves' Cant that was going on in London at the time, because once you publish stuff like that and people start imitating it, it's got to get absorbed a little bit.
I can see some rich toffs sort of swanning around trying to have a go. But yeah, that's where the Van Dyking thing comes in, I'm pretty
But
sure.
it would have fed back to the poorest people in London. There were clubs that would get together of illiterate people and save up enough by a big group of people to pay someone to read the latest instalment of Dickens. This is the level of popularity he had. He was kind of like the TV, the radio of his day in a way. He was mass media in a way no other author had been before.
Yeah, and that brings us on to another episode we'll be doing about penny dreadfuls, because they had the same influence as well. People getting paid to read them or encouraging people to read. But yeah, Dickens it's hard to underestimate the influence he had in the culture at the time. It was huge. and this is why we can't get away from him because he's everywhere. But yeah, so we've got Thieves Cant. We've got this language used amongst the community, constantly evolving, changing, and handed down through generations until 20th century. We've got Dickens, his influence on language. I think that's a fantastic place to leave it this particular week. Are you agree, gentlemen? That's
concur.
fantastic.
And as with most of this stuff, I'm sure it'll filter into other episodes as well.
There's a lot of crossover, yes. Toffs&Toolers, a criminal Victorian adventure, was brought to you by Dreadful Penny Productions. The cast were Mr. Alexander Hudson, Alexander Sweetman Esquire, Sean Gibson, and Mr. Hugh. The scripts were inked by Duncan Allwood, with constant interjections from the cast. The producers were Bella Gregory and Rob Morris. Production facilities were provided by the fine fellows of the Podcast Room, London. This show was first broadcast via 130 individual letters with Royal Mail by Mr. Hugh in 1840, following the introduction of the penny post. He thought it was a bargain.